Welcome everyone to this Privacy Rules Privacy Espresso. The espresso of today will be dedicated to a pretty new topic, one less discussed in the past, but very discussed in the present, that is related to privacy consideration in buying and selling businesses under the Australian perspective. And we will do that with our guest speaker of the day, that is Kelly Dixon from the law firm Macpherson Kelly in Australia. That is also one of the members, luckily for us, of the Privacy Rules Alliance. Kelly is managing principal lawyer at the firm and is also a privacy expert. So that's why we have invited her to speak with us about this interesting topic. So Kelly, thank you very much again for being with us today. And my first question, just to know a bit more on this topic, is how does the Australia privacy regime is compared to the GDPR?
Yes, and hi Alessandro, and hello to everybody else who's joining us today. It's good to see you again. So today we're going to speak very briefly about buying and selling businesses and the privacy considerations that come into that. I think that one of the things that perhaps might make a lot of viewers feel a little bit more relaxed is that Australian privacy law is not quite at the level of GDPR. So, you know, around the world, a lot of people talk quite rightly about GDPR being a gold standard. So I think that, you know, one of the things that we'll talk about today is that we're moving towards GDPR a little bit more. And so I think that these things, a lot of our listeners today will be thinking about some of these from the European perspective. But I say, don't forget the Australian perspective as well if you've got a business that's here.
It's really interesting. I didn't get just one point. So there is a specific regulation for this, or you have, you know, your general privacy regulation that can be applied also to this sector?
Yeah, so it's just our general privacy regulation that applies. And in Australia, the first step in buying and selling a business would be to consider whether the Privacy Act applies in the first place. So for us, the starting position is that it will apply if the business has a turnover of more than 3 million Australian dollars per year. So small businesses don't need to comply with the Privacy Act, but small businesses can be caught by the Privacy Act even if their turnover is less than $3 million. For example, if they are health services providers, because they're dealing with health information and medical information, but also businesses that buy and sell or trade in personal information. So that's the businesses that buy and sell mailing lists, or that can also capture a business, for example, if it isn't the entire business as a whole that is being sold, but just the assets of the business. So if the customer database is one of the assets and that is being sold, then that would be trading in personal information and the Privacy Act would apply.
Okay, perfect. And what's the view of your regulator on this?
Yeah, and I'll mention this a little bit as we get into some of the detail as well. But I think that our regulator, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, has changed their view a little bit and has tightened up their view in relation to buying and selling businesses and the privacy considerations. So as I said, we will talk about this, but when we are talking about what information can be shared between buyers and sellers, our regulator's view is that it is often unlikely that a sale of business is something that is contemplated when people are first providing their personal information. So some of the tips that I'll give today to our listeners is about how you can help to make it more likely or more expected for your customers and for other trading partners in business when you are looking to sell a business.
Okay. So, you know, many different factors that determine if your company will fall under the regulation. So, for example, the sensitivity of the kind of data or the amount of data that you use in your normal business. And is there anything else that you would like to add? Because I have another question.
Yeah, lots of questions. That's great.
Yeah.
It does come down to the size of the business and the structure of the business transaction. So as we said, if the business is being sold or if the shares in the company are being sold and it's a change of ownership, then when the sale is completed, that entity is still the same, even though the owners might have changed. But if the business is being sold out of the company to another entity, then that will be one of the disclosures of information.
Perfect. And another question I have is related to the risks, and in particular to the potential penalties for companies not complying with privacy regulation in those cases. Which are the potential sanctions?
Yeah, so not following privacy laws in Australia will be considered to be an interference with the individual's privacy, but not like GDPR. Our penalties are around 2.4 million Australian dollars. So certainly not as big as under the GDPR, but our penalties have been increasing over previous years.
So the risk is getting bigger, and there is more and more attention to privacy. Just one last question I would like to make to you, Kelly. Considering this overview, do you have any main takeaways for companies that are going to selling or buying businesses? Where should they put their attention?
I think that it's not only the penalty, the financial penalty that is getting bigger, but also people are more aware of what is happening with their privacy as well. So for our listeners today, I'd like to run through a couple of really quick pointers if you're on the vendor side, if you're selling the business, and if you're buying a business as well. So these will cover the due diligence process as well as the sale, but then also on an ongoing basis when the business has been sold and is ready to keep on operating. So for vendors, I have 3 main tips. The first one is, does the information need to be provided to the prospective purchaser in the first place? Or does it have to be provided in the volume? Or could you aggregate the information or de-identify it in some way? So can some of that preliminary due diligence information be provided in a different way as opposed to just handing over heaps of personal information? Secondly, is the disclosure to the potential purchaser consistent with what your privacy policy says or with what you're doing with the business? So in Australia, one of the really key requirements that goes across a lot of our privacy regime is about reasonable expectations. So in your privacy policy, make sure that it says things like, we might disclose your information to purchasers of our business and other things like that. The third tip for vendors is take steps to maintain control of as much of your personal information in your entity as you can. So maintain physical control. With the documents, can they be cited, only looked at, instead of copied or retained? Do you have control mechanisms in your data rooms? Are the passwords limited to certain people? Have you got confidentiality agreements in place for this information as well? And really just common sense, disclose the minimum amount of information that is necessary at each of those steps. For purchasers, I also have a couple of key tips as well. Be mindful of privacy considerations. Avoid collecting the personal information if you can. So as I said, if you're only viewing it and not keeping it and making a record of it, then a lot of the privacy obligations fall away. Be mindful as well of what the vendor is handing over to you. If you're uncomfortable with the level of information that is being given to you, give it back. Don't look at it, don't keep hold of it, and make sure you return or destroy the information at the end of the due diligence process when you don't need it anymore. But once the sale has gone through and post-completion, you do need to make sure that customers are informed. So I know that you won't sometimes do that when the sale is secret and it needs to be kept confidential, but there are requirements to let people know once you've got their information what you're going to do with it. So don't forget that once all of the sale has been completed, there are some privacy obligations to do there. And for both vendors and purchasers, make sure privacy issues are dealt with in the due diligence reports, and make sure you're looking at the privacy policies and getting advice on those aspects, because sometimes it can be forgotten in amongst all of the excitement and all the other things that have to get done as part of a business sale and purchase.
Indeed, the risk is always around the corner on this. And we run out of our time. So thank you very much for being with us today and for this brief introduction to this new, let's say, and relevant topic in relation to privacy. I thank all our listeners for being with us, and I hope to see you all very, very soon again. Bye, everyone.